spent a fair amount of time in the first workshop about this first part, which was we know a lot of graduate students and postdocs don't know what they're going to do when they finish their training. And we talked about a structured stepwise process for how to figure out what your post-training career goals are going to be. And then the second part of this workshop is once you have an idea about where you're headed with your career after your training, how do you set some steps in the next year in order to get there? And that's really what the IDP is a set of action steps in order to help you move forward in your career. We know that for those of you that have been doing IDPs, sometimes an individual development plan, if it's like dictated by your PI, is how are you going to make progress in your research? How are you going to get that paper out? How are you going to get this set of experiments done? But my definition of a good IDP is that all those activities that you're doing and that you're planning need to have some direction so that they help you achieve a career outcome. We know that a challenge from a lot of our students, this is based on some research we did with our student population at UCSF, is that they don't know how to competently choose a long-term career goal. Your research training, we did a long survey of our student population, and they're like, actually, I'm getting really good research training, and I'm happy with the skills that I'm developing in lab, and the fact that my PI is a good mentor for being a PI in the future, if that's what I'm going to do. And that's what your research training should do. But if I'm going to move into a different career path, I don't know how to find resources about that. I don't know how to choose one path that's better than the other. Even if I did learn about all the different careers that are available to me as a PhD level scientist, I don't have confidence that one's better than the other. I know that if I'm going to stay on the academic research career path and be a PI, that my current mentors are my role models for the future. But what if I'm going to be a science policy person or an intellectual property attorney? I need to get new role models that will help me move forward in my career, and I don't know how to do that. And then a lot of our students and postdocs are surprised to learn that all careers are competitive. I'm sure everyone hears that it's difficult to be a PI in the future, and it's challenging, and it can be very rewarding. But the odds are against you because not that many people become research PIs. But all careers are competitive, and you need to spend some time while you're a student or postdoc gaining the skills, building your resume so that when you finish, you're ready to be successful in that next step. And when we started getting all this feedback from our students about the concerns they have about their post-training opportunities, this is when we started trying to come up with a structured career planning and goal setting process that we call an individual development plan. And it's IDP, doing an IDP should be both a process and a product. So the process should include several steps where you're first taking a look backwards. How have my skills developed in the last year? What are my values? In other words, what rewards or outcomes do I want from my career in the future? And are those different from what they were in the past? What tasks do I like to do and which ones don't I like to do? Those are your career-related interests. And then after you've sort of assessed your skills, values, and interests, learn as much as you can about the career opportunities that are available to you as a scientist so that you can make an informed decision based on this data that you've generated about yourself, about which career is the best for you. And then once you pick a career path for your future, set goals that will both move you forward in your research now and also help you achieve the long-term outcome that you want. And then you need to engage your mentors and others to help you implement that plan and do the whole process over again. So an IDP, the process should answer two questions in the end, which is one is where am I headed with my career long-term? And the other is how am I going to get there? What am I going to do in the next year so that I move forward towards that eventual goal? And I think this is very different from some of the IDP processes that we've seen students and postdocs go through, which is more, like I said, a bunch of tasks that you're going to do in the next year to get your research done. That's useful, but that's more like a performance planning process and less focused on career development. And I think an IDP should be both. A good IDP product in the end, so all these steps that you do, The process should lead to some kind of a written set of goals mapped onto a timeline, and that those goals lead to a desired career outcome. And most people find it helpful to make broad goals. So I'm going to learn more about industry trends. I'm going to improve my crystallographic skills. I'm going to attend a Gordon Research Conference, and then breaking those down into action items. And so that's what we're going to do some today, is learning how to set good goals by going through this process. And a good IDP should include a combination of project goals. So the orange one, what are you going to do in the next year in lab to make sure you're advancing towards finishing? But then also skills development. What skills do you need to build and how are you going to build those? And career advancement goals. What am I going to do to make sure that I'm learning about a career that I'm interested in, or getting the best resume written, or meeting people who are going to help me network in that career? So these three combination of research project goals, skill development goals, and career advancement goals, those are what comprise a solid IDP. And we spent, I'm still reviewing what we did last time. We talked about all that stuff, and then we also discussed, spent a lot of time on this first process, the first part of this process, which is answering that question, where am I going? And we talked about how career satisfaction is a function of three major components. One is skills, another is interests. And these are both about the tasks involved in a career path. So if you think about your current work, for example, as a researcher, you go to work every day in your lab and you do a bunch of tasks, and some of them you're good at and some of them you're bad at. You need to get better at. Some of them you don't care that you're bad at them because you never need those in the future. But those are the skills, so the tasks involved in a job on a daily basis. Interests are also about all those tasks, but that's not about how good you are. It's about whether you like them or not. And so the idea is, in the future, if you can find a career path that's full of tasks you're good at, and full of tasks that you like to do, and not too full of tasks that you don't like to do, and that all those things that you do every day at work produce the values you want, and these are the rewards or outcomes that you want from your work. We call them career-related values. If all those tasks produce the rewards or outcomes that you most want, you're going to be happy with your career. And yet, almost every student and postdoc that I talk to has never sat down and actually made lists of these things. And so when you start thinking about what's in my future, it's a very fuzzy process because you don't have any data to base a decision on. And so we spent some time going through skills, values, and interests lists and ranking those in our last workshop. You can find the same list that we did at the myIDP tool, which I'll refer to later in this workshop if you want to go backwards and do those. And we talked about how once you define these skills, values, and interests for yourself and recognize that those are just data generated about you and what you want in your future career, then you can take a finite set of career options, which are also presented in the myIDP tool. There's 20 different career categories that scientists typically go into, and 58 different jobs that scientists often find. So take this list of career options and start learning about each of those options as much as you can, so that you can say, well, here's a career path that I read something about. It says, there's tons of travel in the future if I'm going to pursue this career path. One of my values is to not travel, and therefore I'm going to eliminate that career path. But at least I'm doing it based on some knowledge that I have about that career instead of some fuzzy idea. So this process of exploring careers and narrowing down the career options through a structured process of elimination based on what you know about yourself, this iterative process eventually develops into competence about a future career path. So the sort of narrowing down the options until you find the one that fits you the best. And so then we talked about how to do that in the last workshop. And the career exploration process is just learning about these different careers. And we talked about, if you go to the myIDP tool, which is at this address at the top, you can take these skills, interests, and values assessments, and then the tool actually has an algorithm that will take your skills and interests and suggest some careers that you might want to first start exploring based on how your skills and interests match. And we spent some time in the last workshop explaining how that algorithm works. If you click on a career path and the skills or interests match, you can see how your results from these ratings map against a bunch of career experts that we surveyed about these careers. So that can tell you like where you need to develop your skills or how close your interests match to what the experts feel are a match for these different careers. And then we talked about how to learn more about these different careers through a structured process of activities that will help you move forward. And there are tons of opportunities for you to read about careers, attending events about careers, talking to people and doing informational interviews, which we talked about, and then getting experience. And if you wanted to jump into this process about reading about careers through the myIDP tool, you can click on Read About Careers, and you can find out that if you don't know about science writing careers but you want to learn, click on the Read More section, and you'll be taken to a bunch of articles that you can link through and learn quickly about the differences between the different types of science writing careers, for example. We talked about LinkedIn, and this mapped to the homework assignment, which was LinkedIn is a place where everybody thinks, I'm going to build my LinkedIn profile and the world is going to find me. We talked about how to use it for career exploration and answer questions that you might have about careers. An example would be if you start looking up people whose profiles have character strings in it that you're interested in. So if you want to learn about business science careers and you want to be an investment banker, look up 10 people who have PhDs are investment bankers, and that'll start reading their career profiles from the bottom up, and you'll start to see how they might have gotten there. In this person's case, she went from being a postdoc, doing her PhD and doing a postdoc, to being a scientist in a biotech company. After only 9 months, she became a research associate at a big investment bank, and she sort of moved up the ranks quickly, you can see. And if you keep looking through her profile, you'll see that she completed a whole bunch of investment professional certifications before she made this jump. And this would be a really interesting thing to do. If you're in whatever career path you're interested in, look up people who have those words in their title and read 10 people's profiles. So that was one of the homework assignments. And then once you start learning about people's career paths, starting to move into talking to people and doing informational interviews, which we shared a fair amount of information about in the last workshop. And I think that's about how far we got. The homework assignment was to invest some time in career exploration reading. So go do the LinkedIn or the myIDP readings based on the careers that you're interested in. Look up job postings to identify, okay, I think I want to be a scientist one in a biotech company when I finish my postdoc. Let me look up 20 people who are scientist ones and look for themes about how those people got there and how many years of postdoc experience did they do before they got that scientist job, or did they have to do a postdoc at all? And those are the kinds of things you can find through LinkedIn. And the assignment was specifically to find 10 people and make note of their titles and organizations, people who you want to be like in your future, and then look for themes about their transitional training. What did they do between their training and where they're at now? What types of titles or employers were themed between their PhD and their current work? So what did they have to do in order to get where they are now? What organizations they're following, and what skills are you missing that all those people had? All this information you could dig up in an hour or two of homework, and I think it'd be really useful at helping you figure out how to get from where you are now to where you are going to be in the future. The people who did that homework assignment, there were a few of you. Did you find people that you were interested in? Yeah? What were you interested in? Not to put you on the spot. What career path?
Well, mostly research jobs.
Research? In industry?
In industry and also in national labs.
Ah, and you found people like that?
Yeah.
And what themes did you identify? So if I want to be an industry researcher after my training, did you find that you have to do a postdoc?
Yeah.
Pretty much. That was a theme. Yeah. How many individuals did you look up?
10.
Okay. And did all of them do postdocs?
Most of them did postdocs.
Yeah.
Some of them did not do postdocs.
Yeah. So this is a question that probably one of the most common questions that comes up in our office when students come in. I want to be an industry scientist. do I have to do a postdoc? I'm like, I could tell you what I think and what I've seen lots of people do after they leave UCSF, but answer that question by yourself. Go read 10 job descriptions or look at 10 people's profiles and on LinkedIn, and you can start answering that question by yourself. Project management. Oh.
Common theme was being able to work with other people, because you have to be a team player, and also they all had a certificate of project management.
PMP. So how did you identify that they need to be good at working with people?
I first looked their profile, and most of them also work in many different groups, diverse groups, and then I also try to contact them and ask them for an informational interview, and they really stressed on those things.
Oh wow! So you really did the homework. All right, good job. And what is project management? Were you able to define that by talking to these people? Or what is a career in project management, I guess?
Well, I asked them about their day-to-day work, and they said most of the time it's setting deadlines for each project, making sure everyone is accountable for their part, and also being able to motivate people to do their work and finish it on time. Because you would have people that would say, I can't get this done in 8 weeks, I'll extend it to 12 weeks instead. And you have to really be able to negotiate
That could impact the entire rest of everybody else's part of the project. So what we were going to do is have people, I didn't know who was coming to the workshop necessarily, so we're going to have you group up and talk about your experiences doing this. But I think even from the two examples that were provided, I hope those were convincing that to have you go do this for a couple hours. And one of the things we didn't talk about last time is you can easily make yourself anonymous on LinkedIn if you don't want people to see you were stalking them. But on LinkedIn also, it's kind of there for people to get looked at, right? And so I think you can just go to your account section and make yourself so other people can't see you were looking at them. But unless you're returning to that person's profile every week for the next year, it's probably not creepy. So I wouldn't bother doing that. But some people ask that question. If I'm going to do lots of LinkedIn profiling of people, do I need to make myself anonymous? And I think not, because that's part of the purpose of LinkedIn is to get found. Our students and postdocs always, when we had this homework assignment for a career development class, and they're usually like, this is the most useful thing of the whole class, is learning to use LinkedIn to do career exploration. So we won't do that part. So I think we'll jump into the goal setting part of the workshop, which was, we talked a lot last time about these first two steps, and the last part is, okay, if I have an idea of where I'm headed with my career, and some of you may not, that's okay. That's why you should go back and do this. If I have an idea where I'm headed with my career, what am I going to do in the next year to get there in terms of moving my research forward or making progress in my graduate program? What skills am I going to develop, and what career advancement projects do I need to sort of accomplish? And one of the first things we found at UCSF when we started doing IDPs was people often need some help in learning how to set good goals that are going to be achievable. And what we usually use this device to teach people. How many people seen SMART goals before? Some of you, not everybody. So this is not something I made up. You can find this anywhere online. But there's actually some research done that says if you write a goal that's specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound, you are more likely to achieve that goal than if you just say, I'm going to do this thing in the future. And so when we think about what that means, is the goal focused and unambiguous? So you write a goal and then start asking yourself these questions. If it's not, then it's not. Then you need to make it more specific. Did you actually build into the goal some way of identifying whether it's been achieved or not? And if not, you need to go back and do that. Is there an action required on your part? And that might get back to specificity, but if you're like, I'm going to publish a paper next year, that's so broad that it needs to be more specific, but it's also not a very, the action isn't really clear. There are lots of steps that are going to be built into that. Is it realistic considering the difficulty and the deadline that you've assigned to that goal? And then actually, does it have a deadline? So these are the questions that you should be asking after you write a goal. And then a lot of times our students ask, so I'm writing all these goals, but I actually don't trust myself to do them. Are there ways that I can, take action to make sure that I'll actually get those goals done? And one thing that seems to be helpful is to have people start thinking about broad goals versus actions. So the questions of what is it I want to accomplish versus what am I actually going to do to reach those goals? And the example IDP that I showed before, has project goals, skill development goals, and career advancement goals. So this person, she was going to collect some data, write and submit a paper, and attend a conference in the next year. She's going to improve her skills in crystallographic area, and she's going to learn more about industry career trends because she wants to move into industry when she's finished. Then you can see how she bulleted the actual action goal, the action steps in order to reach those. And those were all, and that's what comprises a SMART goal set. So what we're going to do, so we moved into the goal setting phase of this part, and as I mentioned, people's IDP should have skill development goals, career advancement goals, and how am I going to finish my research or advance in my program goals. We're going to start on this skill piece, and I think I'll give you some examples about how you might write good goals about skill development using this SMART profile. So we're going to look at skills goals. This is a person who wrote the broad goal of becoming a more educated, engaging classroom teacher. This is one of our students, actually. This is how she wrote her goals. She was doing teaching a lab course at a local liberal arts college, and she noticed that 5 minutes into the lecture part of the lab course she was teaching, people were checking their phones, talking to each other, falling asleep. And she's like, I think my lecture skills need to be a little bit more engaging. So already this is a better goal than I want to be a better teacher. It's a little bit more specific and narrow. She wants to be a more engaging classroom lecturer. And so here's the goals that she wrote. I'm going to be a more engaging teacher. And the actions using the SMART device, I'm going to invite the teaching center coach to watch me in class, and I'm going to schedule her on a lecture day for me to come in and watch me. I'm going to do that in mid-May. I'm going to discuss my current strategies for engaging students and get more ideas by talking with the teaching center staff after the coach after she visits my class. And I'm going to also reach out to 2 faculty members who I think are engaging lecturers and ask what they do. And then once I get these strategies, I'm going to put them into practice during my last 2 weeks of the course I'm teaching. And then after that's over, I'm going to schedule 2 guest lectures to practice them and see to stay in practice. And I'm going to do all these by these dates. Some require a start date, some are just require a completion date. So if you look at the specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound, how do you think about this goal? Can you see how she's more likely to get better at it than if she just said, I'm going to become a more engaging teacher next year? It's broken down. What do you think it's missing? Measurable? Yeah. How could she measure whether she's a better teacher or not?
Like student feedback?
Ask for student feedback, like before, after kind of stuff. You could invite the teacher, the coach back in again after and say, hey, am I better than I was? She could count the people sleeping before and after. All kinds of things she could do, but she didn't build that into her process, right? So we talk about sort of, I'm going to pass out one of these sheets for you to fill in. Accountability and measurability kind of go together. And so a lot of times people are like, I'm writing these goals. I don't trust myself to actually get them done. Maybe I should build some accountability into it. And so her PI's name was Deneb. I'm going to tell Deneb that I'm trying to improve my skills, and I'm going to ask her to check with me how it went. So this isn't actual measurability, but it's more likely to be done if you tell your PI you're going to do it and you want them to check with it. It doesn't have to be her PI. Her PI was a very supportive person who was interested in this. It's still kind of missing the measurability part. And so when she finished, she said, the student feedback part, she's going to look at her teaching evaluations from last year's class and this year's class. And there was an item on it on the teaching evaluations called Professor Communicates Material Effectively During Lecture. She's going to look at whether she improved in that area from one course taught to the other, and she's going to report that out to her PI. So this alone was a pretty good, pretty well-written goal, but even better if she builds some accountability into it for, I'm going to report out to someone else, and I'm building in the measurability part. So I think this would be a really good goal. I think she would do it if she wrote it like that. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to write your own skill development goals, and then we'll talk about those goals and how to get better at them. Pick 2 skills that you'd like to improve. The instructions are on the sheet that you have, but pick 2 skills you'd like to improve and use the SMART principle to fill those out. And then we'll move on. So what I'd like for you to do is see if you can work on helping each other improve your goals. Get with a neighbor or 3 people at the most, or else it just takes too long to process. So 2, 3 at the most. Share the skill area you want to improve, the broad goal, and how you've broken down into action steps. And then have your partner give 2 kinds of feedback. One is, how could the goal be more SMART? So how could it be more specific, more measurable, more action-oriented, more realistic, and is it time-bound? But then also, help your partner come up with new action items or new methods for improving that skill. And the feedback we get from this exercise is always that, wow, I got all kinds of advice from my colleagues that I hadn't thought of in terms of helping with this. So share resources, share ideas, and then move to the next person. We'll give you like 2 minutes per person at the most, so we'll move on in about 4 minutes. As I mentioned before, I want to make sure that we promote a balance of types of career goals, so that you're not just thinking about your skills, which are probably mostly oriented towards advancing your research or getting you through your program. We don't want you to just think about tasks that you're going to do to get through your program. We also want you to think about career development goals. And this part, our students tell us it's a little bit fuzzy, like how is career advancement different from anything else? So we have kind of a list of goal categories that you might start thinking about including. But I do think it's important as you're doing these annual plans, have something in there that's longer term goal. So I'm going to expand my network and meet people in a particular career path, and I'm going to define how I'll meet them. I'm going to learn about some career options. Well, which ones are you going to, career paths are you considering? What are you missing in terms of your knowledge base, and how are you going to acquire that knowledge about that career? I'm going to get some experience in that career. I'm going to take a course or do an internship that would make me more qualified when I finish my PhD or my postdoc. I'm going to work on my job search strategy. I'm going to prepare resumes and cover letters. I'm going to get ready to interview. I'm going to get ready to negotiate my compensation, which you all will be able to do at some point in your careers. So these are some categories you might want to write down. If you go back to this idea of going from the broad goal to the action, some examples of career advancement goals might be, I'm going to learn about industry careers from that person, and I'm going to do it before April. That's kind of a SMART goal, but you can see how she might get it done more if she broke it into these actions. I'm going to read about research careers in January. I'm going to attend a couple of industry career panels during January, February. I'm going to go out and do some informational interviews with scientists who are already in industry. And then for accountability, I'm going to set up lunch with a couple of other people I know who are interested in industry careers, and they're out there trying to learn also, and we're going to share with each other so that we both build our knowledge and stay accountable to get it done. You can see how this is likely to provide a lot better outcomes than this goal. If it was only written in that broad way. For someone who wants to do teaching and research in a small liberal arts college, I'm going to read the Council on Undergraduate Research's book on teaching careers in industry or in research in liberal arts colleges. I'm going to talk to 2 faculty members who are actually doing that and find out how they got there. And I actually really want to learn, do I have to write grants if I'm in a liberal arts environment, and are those required for tenure? I don't know how to answer that question without talking to these people, so that's something that I'm going to find out. So you can see how this level of goal writing is going to be better. A third one might be, I'm going to get a postdoc position and I'm interested in renewable energy and I want to work at a national lab or a government lab. And so here's those specific tasks I'm going to do to move on to getting a job, including writing a solid CV, getting my cover letter together, finding some labs that I'm interested in doing work in and reaching out to those people, practice my interview skills, so if I get an interview, I'll be better at it. And I'm going to do this through, making an appointment with the career services folks or Harinder and help them have me work through that. So take a few minutes and write a goal or 2 that will help you move forward. I've included some of those prompts. And after you're done writing, we'll take the next step. So I'll give you a few minutes to write these goals. We're going to talk about project goals after that, and then talk about how you can talk with your PIs, your mentors, more effectively about this whole process. Right, so this is a career advancement goal. The categories are kind of there. It's something that's focused on finishing, like after you finish, how are you going to move on to your job? Even if you're a first-year postdoc or a first-year graduate student, still important to start at least thinking about those things. Whereas the first one was specifically on skill development. How am I going to get better at something? I wanted to go on to this last piece, which is project goals. So what do you need to do to graduate or advance in your program or finish the research required for your postdoc? And the same thing kind of applies here, is that we see people writing these real broad goals, and then that's it. And yet these things tend to not get done. But you can see how things like, I'm going to write a paper, can be easily broken down into at least these sections, and you could put deadlines on those. You could set accountability by saying, instead of, next year I hope to be meeting with my PI about the paper that I wrote, you could say, I'm going to meet, monthly or every other month, and hopefully get a different section done each time and get some feedback. And if my PI is expecting me to meet with them, then that builds in that accountability. For example, you don't always have to use your PI as the person that you're being accountable to. We've had people do this in peer groups by, I'm going to make a commitment to my peers to have this section done next week, and then we meet and they've made other commitments and we're going to keep each other accountable. That can be really useful. This seems useful to think about in terms of actual research tasks. Instead of thinking about like action items, because that might be too specific and you can't necessarily plan months in advance because everything builds on each other when you're actually thinking about your experiments. But if you're thinking about things like, my broad goal is to solve the crystal structure of a protein, particular protein, that might be too broad, and yet you're not sure exactly what the steps are. And one of the big problems we hear from our students are things like, it took me 7 or 8 years to finish, and in hindsight, I could have cut a year off of that if I had, given up on a particular project earlier. Or I could cut it 6 months out if I had recognized that I need to try a different tack. And so maybe you can build some sort of milestones into your broad goals for research by saying, okay, if I can't do this by a certain date, then I'm going to get feedback and see how I could improve it. If I don't make progress by the second date, I'm going to try a completely different approach. And if I don't get progress on solving that crystal structure by a third date, then I'm going to go to my advisor and talk about dropping the whole project because it seems like, or discuss dropping that part of the project because it seems like it's just not going to be productive for me. And so sometimes thinking like that in terms of milestones can be a lot more helpful in keeping you on track than losing a whole year because you didn't know how to give up on something. Does that make sense? I'm not a scientist, but I've talked to thousands of scientists. It seems like one of the challenges that people face in this process is just being so close. It's like, or when something's an iterative process, if I try one more try at this thing, it's going to work. But if you built in some accountability, maybe that person can give you some wisdom at each of these points about whether to keep going. I agree that that's a big challenge, but at least having some plan around it probably prevents you from having year-long regret. So this is probably the hardest part for people, even though you do this in one way or another. I'll pass out this third sheet. You do this one way or another throughout your work by planning out your experiments. Thinking about it longer term can sometimes be really useful. I'll give you a couple minutes to fill out this last one, and then we'll talk about how these all fit into an IDP and how to talk to your PIs about your IDPs most effectively. And then we'll be done. Again, I know some of you are still writing. That's kind of the idea, is that we wanted to give you a flavor for writing skills, a chance to get a flavor for what it's like to write skills goals, research project goals, as well as career advancement goals. And then basically with a few of these goals, you've started writing an IDP. So congratulations. I would say in another 15, 20 minutes, half hour, you could have a really solid IDP written. If you go back and finish writing more of these goals, figure out the broad goal areas, and then creating some of these action items. You can do all of this in the myIDP tool. If you go to myidp.sciencecareers.org, I think most of the feedback we get is I can spend 2 hours a year updating these, and I'll be able to improve my productivity, increase my confidence that where I'm headed in the right direction, feel like I can achieve what I'm trying to achieve, which seems to be a big challenge for people if they're in long training programs, and that this process really pays off. One of the things I did want to mention is that the myIDP model is something that is one way to go through individual development planning, but there's also other ways to do it. We've read a lot of literature about these, and sometimes people say it's best to just have a conversational model where you and your PI, you and your advisor or mentor sit down and answer these 4 questions together. Like, what did you say you were going to do last year? What did you actually do? What are you going to do in lab next year? Where are you headed when you finish, and how can I help you get there? How can we work together to get you there? The student writes out the responses and then has a conversation with the PI. We'll talk about those conversations in a moment. I'll pass out the slides. There's a really great article, I think, in Molecular Cell from a lab at Harvard, Angela DePace's lab, where she has dual IDP approach, where it's sort of the same questions, like what did you do last year, what are you going to do in the future, where are you headed, and how can we help you get there? But then there's a feedback process for both the student and the PI. So the PI fills this out on the student fills this out on the PI, and they have a conversation about how they're going to progress together. That can be a really interesting model. So there's a whole article about how it works. And I think they do these in like lab retreat formats, so that everybody goes away and has these conversations with Angela all in one weekend or something. And then there's more very structured stepwise models like ChemIDP or myIDP, or it sounds like some of the departments here have their own models. And so again, I want to just give you some options that I don't think myIDP is the one that you have to use. A lot of people find it very, very structured and useful. Some people find it too structured. And then I just wanted to sort of wrap up with a discussion about how to talk about your career and your career plans with your advisors. And there's some interesting data out there from a paper in 2014 where they looked at, I think it was 500 pairs or 250 pairs, I'm not sure, of postdoc PI pairs. And they asked them about their experience doing IDPs together. And when they looked at people who reported, pairs that reported they hadn't had an IDP discussion between the PI and the postdoc, the PIs tended to say, I didn't talk to my postdoc because they didn't ask me. And the postdoc said, I didn't talk to my PI because I thought they weren't open to it. Or I thought they were actively not open to it. And so there's this discontinuity between what your PI invites you to do and what you feel empowered to do in terms of having a career planning talk. I think it's on the PIs to not just say, hey, my door's open, but to actually set these appointments and encourage these conversations. But if they don't, it's on you to find someone who will help you. And I think that's the hard part about this process is if your PI is not helping you through this, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. You should still be planning your career and finding mentors to help you through that process. The one comment I will make is that this can be done too soon. Like, I think people need to establish themselves in their group and get a reputation for doing good work. And so I would say maybe this is the time when you work on your IDP on your own and find someone besides your PI to talk about it with. Or just for this year, do an IDP on your own and don't share it. So I do think it's super important to get help from mentors, but sometimes that mentor isn't the person who's your boss. In fact, I think that's the next slide, is that PIs have this really difficult job where you want them to help you move forward in your career and be very open to everything that you want to do and be supportive and pushing you forward. But they also have different goals, right? They're a boss that has to produce papers and grants in order to get their career moving forward. And they have a whole team of people working for them. They're also a teacher and educator who's sort of advising you through your process. And so it's a very difficult set of roles that actually are in conflict often. And that seems like something that is helpful for our students to start considering as future PIs themselves sometimes, is how am I going to navigate these roles? And when I go to my PI as a student and say, or a postdoc and say, I have these goals, maybe the timing is better, maybe your timing about having these conversations is better sometimes than others based on what the stressors are of the lab. And so I have some scenarios we'll kind of go through shortly that might help you with that, but sometimes it's better not to have the conversation, I think. Yeah. So that actually brings up a really good point. If you're using the myIDP tool specifically, you can, at the end of the tool, you can print out like everything, which if you print everything out, probably takes like 6 or 7 pages. If you like PDF that to your boss and say, hey, can we have a conversation about this giant book that I just created about myself? They're going to be like, whoa. But if you create a short list, like our sample here, of things that I want to do, and if it's not the right time, maybe you leave this part out, the career advancement part, then that makes it a lot more a useful conversation. Just some general points that we think will make this process more useful is make it a timely appointment. So I think maybe that's getting at the discussion that we just started to have, which is use your best judgment about whether you should be having that conversation about your career in your future now. Maybe make sure that it's not part of other lab meetings. If you have a normal one-on-one with your PI, make it a separate meeting from that, because your one-on-ones, you probably have the habit of talking about your research only, right? And so if you come in and like, hey, I'm going to talk about my future, and your PI has all these items they want to talk about with your PI, or with your research, that's already a disconnect. So let them know that you want to have a separate conversation. Sometimes going away from the lab, we'll have a cup of coffee with your mentor would be useful. Start out with something positive, especially if you're asking to do something that you're not sure they'll approve of. Like I want to go teach a class next semester because I need some teaching experience in order to be a liberal arts professor. I really enjoyed my last year in the lab. I feel I made a lot of progress on this project, and there are some things that I want to do that will help me move forward in my career as well, and I'd like to talk about both of those. Again, don't share your entire big document. Make a concise outline for the meeting. I guess to the conversation also earlier, know when and when not to share the where am I headed with my career. And that knowing when to share it might be based on advice you get from your peers, from other advisors, from just looking at what's happening in the lab at the time. We had a postdoc who I was talking about just was working on the thing that was going to really move this lab forward, something super interesting. At the same time, he got an awesome job offer from a company in the Bay Area. They wanted him to start really quickly. He didn't try to negotiate for a longer start date, and he told his PI that he was leaving, and he was the only person that could do this technique 4 days before his industry job started. He should have been having that conversation about where he was headed long before that, because the PI was known as somebody who was open to careers. But so in that case, I think the postdoc misstepped, because now he burned that bridge with the PI and probably made it more difficult for people in the future to move gracefully to industry. So at the same time, while that PI is known to people like me to be open to careers, he apparently didn't make it well enough known to his postdocs. So both parties need to be working on this together. But I think your job is to take care of yourself, but also engage carefully and try to find multiple mentors. When you're talking about moving into non-academic careers, if you feel like your PI would want you to do that, use positive language. So we've had students or postdocs go into these conversations and say, I've really been watching what it's like to be a PI, and it seems unattractive for all these reasons. Therefore, I'm going to do this. How not to do it is instead of talking like, hey, I'm really interested in working on drug development and working in a fast-paced team environment, And I think I can find that in industry based on the people I've been talking to. And so I'm going to do some exploration in industry careers. That sounds so much better than I don't want to be a PI because your job sucks, right? Which your PI obviously doesn't think that's the case, or they wouldn't be doing that. So, so don't make it a referendum on their modeling. If there's a list of things that you want to do, try to recognize this role conflict that your PIs have as well. And if it's going to take you time away from the lab to go to career development workshops or take a class in project management skills, recognize that you might need to negotiate some. I'll make sure I take a class, a night class, so that I'm not missing lab, or I'll make up time if I'm going to go teach, et cetera, those kinds of things. I have some scenarios that I think actually might be useful to discuss. These are the idea is maybe put yourself in a PI role and see if you can use their perspective to figure out how you would navigate some of these difficult situations. And the questions that I'll run through with you after I read you this scenario. What are the issues involved? How is the student perspective different from the faculty perspective? How does faculty role conflict enter the situation? What should be done and what language would you use? I'm going to go to this long one, but I think is really an interesting case study. So you're a PI, and you're looking forward to meeting with your graduate student on Monday and talk about their final committee meeting and plans for wrapping up their work. You have some thoughts about potential postdoc labs that they should go to. You want this person to write a manuscript and possibly write a review article in the next year before he defends. Things have been going well. You're optimistic about his final year in grad school. You know that he'll be very competitive for postdocs in the very best of labs. I'm sure all of you have PIs who have these hopes for you. The meeting starts off with some good science discussion. He shared some great data from the last few weeks and had several ideas for next steps. Toward the end of the meeting, just when you were preparing to give him your thoughts on reaching out to some colleagues for postdoc opportunities in the future, he asked for permission to start an internship at the university's Global Health Policy Office, which was going to take up to 20 hours a week out of the lab. He tells you that he plans to apply for a AAAS policy fellowship next June, and that he learned at a workshop that Harinder had on policy careers, that doing an internship in the policy arena during graduate school would help make him more competitive for that fellowship. Your student appears nervous about this conversation. The two of you often talk about postdocs, and he thinks you'll be disappointed in him. He'd like for you to be supportive of his career goals, but beyond that, he needs your permission to start the internship. So he had, in this is a true story, the PI has to sign off for the student to be able to do the internship in the university setting. He seemed to be stressed. He was stressed about asking you this, and he had put off the conversation. The internship is set to start next week. You're caught off guard by the conversation, irritated that he applied for an internship without talking to you, and stressed about how his shorter work week might impact the renewal of your grant. You're also disappointed that he doesn't want to do a postdoc after all those opportunities you gave him. So PI perspective, I'll have you get into pairs or threes or fours and try to go through these questions for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll process. If we go through the questions, what are the issues? First of all, what are the issues? Yeah, I mean, we don't know how open the PI was to it, and I think PIs should be projecting openness if they are, but it could have been done earlier. Apparently, there wasn't an IDP process. That's one takeaway from the scenario, because everyone seemed completely surprised in doing this at the last minute. Whereas if there'd been an IDP happening, this long-term idea might have at least come up, and they might have been talking about how they're going to get there. It's kind of a no-win situation because of that conflict. The PI really needs to push for getting that grant out. What do you think some solutions could be? Can you put this off till next quarter, or can you do 5 hours a week instead of 20 hours a week or something? 20 hours is a lot. So find another person in the lab, like a more junior person, and train them so that they become competent, so that productivity keeps happening. And then someone else in the lab is trained also, which makes it because it sounds like this person's going to be moving on relatively soon anyway. In the next, find an advocate who can help. Yeah, all good solutions. The goal with this task for you was to, like I said, try to put yourself in the shoes of a PI and also think about solutions. A lot of times when, well, in this case, you know, the student came away thinking their PI was being super unsupportive, and yet the conversation they had didn't actually go to the negotiation point. It was, you know, it was done so late that the PI, you know, immediately got upset. He was actually upset about the timing, not about the career path. The student came away thinking my PI is not supportive of the career that I want to do, and they just had this big disconnect about the whole thing. So my goal was to have you think a little bit about the idea of negotiating these things as well as planning ahead and thinking about yourself in terms of the PI's challenges as well. Oh, yeah, so in this true story, what did happen, the student actually did the internship a whole quarter later because the PI was just like, I need you in this lab, you're the only person that can do this thing, and we got to get this grant out. The answer is no. So they came to a good place after some intervention from another PI, actually. But initially, it was like complete disconnect. My PI doesn't want me, he's completely unsupportive of everything, and this PI was like, this person like is trying to blow up everything in my lab, and so they had to like come back to a settled dispute, a positive settlement on the dispute. So it did end happy, but a lot of things could have been avoided. So good question. So just as a wrap up, I was going to mention that the IDP process is something that should be done, I think, on your own in terms of writing it out, but then finding the mentors to do this and doing it in a timely fashion can be really make it, you know, not just a useful set of things to write every year, but a way to really advance your career quickly. So I hope you all do that. Thanks for your participation. Good luck finishing your IDPs, and let us know if you have any feedback on this. Yeah. So thank you.